Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final college game day show of the season. My name is Brian. Alongside me again for the 17th and last show of the season, we have Andy Hopper and Tom Scavetta. How's it going, Andy?
It is going. Certainly is going. First show of 2023. Excited to be here. Excited to break down the championship game. I want to give a shout out to the TCU haters, of which there are many. They fucking did it. The Frogs did it. The Hypno Toads are here. And I think they might be about to get dog walked by Georgia, but they fucking made the national championship game.
Yeah, hell of a weekend. Tom, how's it going up there?
It's going pretty well. Shout out TCU once again. Those Horned Frogs, they did it. My boys at work were telling me, nah, Michigan is going to roll over the Horned Frogs. And as a Notre Dame fan, the second they said that, TCU money line, click. That's all I have to say. And New Year's Eve was a dandy. Unfortunately, my body wouldn't let me stay up for the end of that Georgia-Ohio State game. But you damn know well enough, I watched the second half on replay. And my gosh, Stroud actually played pretty well. He played pretty well in that game. But Stetson Bennett's a winner. He is a pure winner, and great bowl game season, boys.
Yeah, and speaking of that, we'll just quickly recap the games because, as far as I can remember, in the 7 or 8 seasons that we've had the 14 playoff, this is probably the best semifinal matchups we've ever seen, at least in my eyes. Andy, quickly, we'll start with you. What were your thoughts from those two playoff semifinal games?
I think you nailed it on the head, Brian. I think two of the best semifinal games we've ever seen in the college football playoff. I don't say that lightly. TCU 51, Michigan 45. I said it before we started recording. I don't know how that touchdown got called back on Michigan. Then, of course, they fumble in the very next play. And then that last fourth down that they absolutely needed, do or die, that they reviewed for targeting but ended up not calling, which looked like targeting to just about everybody. But I'm happy for TCU. I did want them to win. I had the over, which was fucking smashed, boys. Good feeling there. But yeah, Duggan looked great. Let's see what they can do against Georgia. And then in the late game, that Ruggles missed field goal is an all-time missed field goal now, just by how far off it was and just how it was never close. I was watching at a bar with a couple Ohio State moneyline bets riding on it, and it didn't go great. But Ohio State proved they were supposed to be there, and so did TCU, because the narrative all morning up until 3 o'clock when TCU kicked off, after Bama just absolutely trounced Kansas State, was that TCU didn't deserve to be there. Bama should be there. Bama should be there. I think TCU definitely proved themselves. For Ohio State, I think the only grievance you could have is you got to play a little bit better defense, and then maybe on that last drive, I think they stalled out the last 3 plays before he kicked the field goal. Needed to try to get a couple more yards to get him a little closer, and maybe he makes it and doesn't completely shank it. But yeah, that's my quick recap. If it was quick, I don't know.
Yeah, the pressure on that kick had to be tremendous. You could tell he just
Yeah.
Yeah,
tried to just kick as hard as he could, hope and a prayer type of thing, and the power was there, kind of, but the direction was way off.
just close your eyes and just fucking swing that leg as hard as you can.
Exactly. Tom, what are your takeaways from those two games?
Takeaways were the committee got it right with the final four teams. They got it right. Nobody thought TCU deserved to be there. Why is TCU there and not Alabama? Well, TCU deserved to be there. That's all I have to say. Their only loss this year was to a team in a conference title game that they beat earlier in the season. And their defense came to play. Their defense really to play. I was just very impressed. Again, there were 44 points scored in that third quarter, but both games were outstanding. But I got to say, the TCU win definitely surprised me, but I could not be more happy. And Georgia's a Georgia, man. Dogs are going to dog, and that's all I've got to say. Committee got it right. Finally.
Yeah, the committee got it right. I don't know if we said that at all, if not often. It's very, very rare. But yeah, no complaints here on my end. I think that was the correct 4 teams. We saw that over the weekend. Just 2 phenomenal games, four phenomenal performances from all 4 teams. But I'm glad. I think the 2 teams that won were the 2 teams that deserved it. But yeah, for me, as far as those games goes, not much else to add. Just TCU, the defense looked absolutely relentless. I know from the Big 12, often we only talk about the offense, but they were just absolutely ferocious, especially in that first half. Michigan couldn't get anything done. I think that it was held them to like 6 points at half. Donovan Edwards, who was supposed to be the replacement for Blake Corum, he's been doing well, but they just kept him to nothing, kept him off the scoreboard. And then on the offensive side, Quentin Johnston just had some massive catches. Duggan didn't really have that great of a day overall, so Johnston came to the rescue a few times with some massive catches for 163 yards, and that was just on 6 catches. So, massive performance from TCU. And then, yeah, the Georgia-Ohio State game, I thought that was much more even. Like you said, Tom,
Mm-hmm.
CJ Stroud had a phenomenal game. That's probably the best he's looked all season. I haven't caught all their games, but I know I mentioned earlier in the season, it almost looked like they were kind of in a lull, just, going through the steps, winning,
Mm-hmm.
getting to where they needed to go, besides the Michigan game, obviously. Uh, but man, he looked so good. So he kept Ohio State in that game, and it was just absolutely phenomenal from start to finish for both games. So we'll move into our coverage of the final. We do have Georgia taking on TCU. As far as finals goes, this is one I'm super excited for. Maybe the most excited for. We have, um, a standard kind of #1 team in Georgia. They were there last year. They won it. And, a classic underdog story here with Sonny Dykes' TCU team. Andy, we'll start with you. What is your coverage of this game? Who's going to win it? Actually, we'll save winners for the very end for our score predictions. But, what are your thoughts on how this game's going to play out?
I'm hoping for another shootout, like we saw with Ohio State and Georgia in the last game. Uh, sorry, I just went blank. My girlfriend just texted me something, then just completely forgot what I was saying. And TCU had a shootout with a very good Michigan defense in their last game. Like I said, they scored 51 points. So we know they can score against top talent. I'm looking for Max Duggan. I'm looking for him to hook up with Quentin Johnston a couple times. I'm looking for Stetson Bennett to be, the veteran quarterback that he is. I don't think he's going to make too many mistakes. He's going to be a game manager. I assume they're going to have him get the ball in the hands of the playmakers. They're going to have him do it pretty quick. So if you look at both of these offenses, I mean, Georgia's 499 total yards of offense a game, actually outgaining TCU offensively this year. I would not have guessed that. More passing yards. TCU's got the slight edge in rush yards. TCU scoring 41 points a game. Georgia putting up 39. Defensively, this is what scares me, is like the discrepancy between these SEC guys and these Big 12 guys on TCU. I'm hoping it's not too much to overcome. I mean, this Georgia defense giving up right under 80 yards a game, rushing only 224 through the air. So, I mean, Duggan and this offense, they're going to have their hands full. Georgia's getting 12.5 points. I really, really want it to be close. I'm going to be rooting hard for TCU. But yeah, that's kind of those are my opening thoughts on the game.
Yeah, the way that you were hesitant on a lot of that was kind of how I was last week with the last show with the TCU versus Michigan matchup. Michigan just on paper looks like they're gonna get it done 100%, but I was just feeling TCU, and had to pick them. And it's gonna be another week of that for TCU going up against a huge Georgia team here. Tom, what are your opening thoughts on this matchup?
My opening thoughts are, can TCU's defense do it again? Because one thing they did in the Michigan game really well was they forced J.J. McCarthy to make mistakes and look like old Cade McNamara. McCarthy had those 2 picks, the 2 pick sixes, I should add, Bud Clark and D. Winters, respectively. People forget TCU got 2 touchdowns from their defense in that game. And how about Dylan Horton with those 4 sacks? Those 3 guys on each level of the defense are going to have close to repeat performances because they still gave up 100 yards each to Roman Wilson and Ronnie Bell. Now, Georgia's wide receivers may not be as scary, but they still have Vlad McConkey and that Arias Smith guy who blew up for a 76-yard catch in the game against Ohio State. That was very impressive. As Andy mentioned, Quentin Johnston is that go-to target. Had a 76-yard touchdown catch in the fourth quarter in that game. TCU also had 263 rushing yards against Michigan. I do not see them having 263 rushing yards against Georgia, nor do I see them jumping out to a 14-0 lead. And you won't be able to beat Georgia when you commit 3 turnovers. They did against Michigan, which is why Michigan is a bunch of frauds, like they always are. And Jim Harbaugh, since being the head coach of the Wolverines, yet to win a bowl game. So as far as I know, he's average. Georgia, for them, they've overcome a lot of adversity this season. They've had injuries on both sides of the ball. I'm concerned about Keely Ringo getting exposed again. I mean, guys, his draft stock went down after that performance Saturday night. He did not have a good game at all. Emeka Egbuka went off in that game along with Marvin Harrison Jr. So if Georgia's defense is going to play like that again and give up 41 points to a Michigan team that doesn't like to throw the ball a whole lot, imagine how many they could potentially give up to a TCU team that has Max Duggan on their center. That's scary. And we're talking about a defense that all season only gave up 13 points per game. So they're really going to be put to the test. I think, personally, it was sort of a fluke for Georgia's defense. I think they're going to play much better. First and foremost, you want to contain Quentin Johnson. Kentrell Miller is obviously somebody you want to look out for. 1,400 yards and 17 touchdowns this year. And then I don't know if I love the public criticism by Kirby Smart of Stetson Bennett. I don't know if I love that. You do that privately, in my opinion, especially before a national title game, because quite frankly, this is the biggest game of his life, right? I mean, this could be his last football game. Who knows if he's going to make it to the NFL? There's no guarantee. Nothing's guaranteed. I mean, yeah, they have 3 running backs with 7 or more touchdowns and 500 yards. And yeah, Andy said it to an extent. He is sort of a game manager, but he's clutch. He's clutch. He can make throws. He's not the best, most talented player out there, but he's a winner. And that's all that matters, right? Brock Bowers, really good season. That's a key player for me. I'm just really excited to, kind of dive more into this, but those are my opening thoughts, Brian. It was more like half a book, but my opening thoughts are Georgia and TCU. Their defense is sort of flip-flopped for me last week.
Yeah, it's an incredible matchup because I don't know if we've seen such an explosive offense from Georgia before in the past. Like TCU and the Big 12 is sort of, the offensive, I don't know if I'll call them juggernauts, but, they don't really play defense in that league. On the SEC side, defense is where it's at, and that's typically where Georgia, your Alabamas, your LSUs absolutely thrive. And this, I'll get into this during my players to watch, but this Georgia team, there aren't really many standout star players, at least to me. It's spread so evenly, and I think that's perfect for a QB like Stetson Bennett. So the matchup I think is going to be super exciting. TCU came into the season unranked. They've been phenomenal on both sides of the ball. They play a sellout defense that, like I said, was absolutely ferocious last week. We've got 2 coaches here who come from fantastic all-time coaching trees. Kirby Smart from Nick Saban and Sonny Dykes from the Mike Leach coaching tree. So that's going to be interesting to watch as well. TCU absolutely dominant in the first half. They did kind of slip up a little in the second half, and they're not going to be able to do that against Georgia if they want to win this final. It needs to be a 60-minute game. But in the first half, they didn't allow Michigan to get anything. No big plays. They got QB pressures. The secondary was all over the place. They can do that for both halves this week. I think they have a legitimate chance to win this game. And as far as, Tom, you brought up the turnovers. Both those interceptions by Duggan in the semifinal were unlucky deflections, I would call. Or the one was certainly not his fault, and the other, not entirely on target, but kind of the wide receiver's fault, not getting his hands underneath the ball. So, Georgia's defense is going to be all over him, going to be all over those receivers, but I don't know if I would blame Duggan's decision-making, if that makes sense. So I still think, despite the fact that he was only like 14 for 29 last week, that not all of it was entirely his fault. and that offense is still in a place to be where they can challenge Georgia's defense. Obviously, Kendre Miller suffered that really weird leg injury, got it twisted up, uh, going to the ground on a tackle. They put in Amari DeMarcado. He did a pretty good job in Miller's absence, actually. But TCU is obviously going to want Miller back in the game, if for nothing else than to have those two guys to switch out with each other, keep them fresh. So that'll bring us into our players to watch for this CFP final. Andy, we'll start with you. Two teams here, lots of star players. Who are your players to watch for TCU?
Two players to watch each team, starting with TCU. It's Quentin Johnson. He is their number one receiver, 59 receptions, 1,066 yards, 6 touchdowns on the year, averaging about 82 yards a game and 18 yards per catch. He's a big body. He can go up and get the ball. Like Tom mentioned earlier, he had a 76-yard touchdown in the fourth quarter in the semifinal game. He is Max Duggan's favorite target. He's a guy that's been projected to be a top 10 pick in this year's NFL draft. Kind of hoping the Bears go after a guy like this. I'd love to see him in Chicago, but he's my guy on offense. Defensively, I am going with Hodges Tomlinson, Travius Hodges Tomlinson. He won the Cornerback of the Year award in college football. He's had a pretty solid year for them so far. Started all 14 games, 41 solo tackles, 4 interceptions. 3 interceptions on the year. It's good for second on the team. He's also forced 1 fumble. Really good in coverage. Look for him to be up against their number 1 receiver. I expect him to be on McIntosh a lot. Obviously, they bring him out of the backfield as well. Maybe him matched up against Lad McConkey on the outside. It's going to be interesting to see, but those are my 2 guys from TCU. And then if we go over to the Georgia side, it's the guy Tom was kind of talking shit about earlier. It's Keely Ringo. He did have a rough game against Ohio State. Ibuka cooked this guy. He's my player to watch because I want to see if he can turn it around in this championship game. He is one of Georgia's top corners. He's a guy that's been projected as a first-round pick in the NFL draft. So can he bounce back? Are they going to put him on Quentin Johnston? Are they going to put him on somebody else like Tay Barber or one of the other guys? Be interested to see how he bounced back. He had 5 tackles in the semifinal win, but gave up quite a bit to Ibuka as well. And then offensively for Georgia, it is McIntosh. That's my guy. He can come out of the backfield and catch the ball. You can hand him the ball and he can run it. 505 yards receiving. That's good for third on the team. 2 touchdowns there, and he's their leading rusher. With 779 yards, 10 total touchdowns, averaging 5.5 yards a carry. So those are my players to watch for the national championship game.
All right, Tom, who do you got for us?
For TCU, it's the quarterback, Max Duggan, on offense. Again, 21 years old, 6'2", not the biggest quarterback, but 2022 Davey O'Brien Award winner, Johnny Unitas Golden Arm Award winner, Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year Award winner, second team All-American winner, first team All Big 12. Are you kidding me? I just listed off a laundry list of accolades for this guy, a guy that really wasn't well known until this year. And as hyped up as this quarterback class was for this year's NFL draft, Max Duggan was never really in the mix in those names. And now I think all of us can agree Max Duggan is in the mix. He's inserted himself in there. He's had a really good season. I think he's a player that is going to cause some problems. 32 touchdowns to just 6 interceptions. He's very good at utilizing Quentin Johnston, like Andy mentioned a few moments ago. He also has good role players to throw to as well. Defensively for TCU, I like Dylan Horton. 10 sacks on the season. He had 4 against the Wolverines. He had 4. He just blew up their offensive line and drove through the trenches. Horton, he had 4 last year as a junior. Again, this will only help his draft stock. I always like the players in the trenches, interior defensive lineman. I think he's done a really good job this season for a defense that has struggled at times. Also, 4 tackles for loss and 1 pass defended in that game. So, again, Michigan really couldn't get much going at times throughout the course of this game. That offense was 3 for 13 on third down. A lot of those were third and long plays where Horton was getting sacks. So those are my 2 players to watch for the Horned Frogs. And we'll stick with Georgia here, just to clarify. Offensively, for the Dogs, I'm going to take You guys know where I'm going with this, right?
We
I
do.
don't know if
I
this
didn't take him because I knew he was off limits.
It's all right. Maybe I'll spread the wealth one day. Tight end Brock Bowers, the best tight end in the nation this year. 56 catches for 790 yards and 6 TDs. He is a force to be reckoned with. He is the alpha target of this Bulldogs offense. Some will argue it's Kenny McIntosh, but Brock Bowers is really nice over the middle of the field. He's a security blanket for Stetson Bennett. In the game against Ohio State, Brock Bowers was impressive. He had 4 catches for 64 yards, so he pretty much averaged 16 yards per catch. You'd like to see him have a couple more receptions in the national title game. I think he will against the TCU defense that, on paper this season, is not as good. He's a great route runner, too. Also a good blocker for a guy who can catch the football. So that's my offensive player to watch for Georgia. My defensive player to watch for Georgia, and this is going to surprise some people. This is a guy that probably not many of you people know. It is Jamon Dumas Johnson. He This past game against Ohio State was remarkable. He had a sack and he had a lot of pressures against Ohio State. Only 4 sacks on the season, but you have to keep in mind that this guy is only really a sophomore, so he's only going to get better from here. He also made a statement saying stats don't matter for this UGA defense. It's not selfish ball over here. Remember last year, guys, where stats were really popping out for Georgia, whether it was Nakobe Dean or Jordan Davis, guys like that. You don't really see much of that this year, right? Where like the sack numbers aren't eye popping, the interception numbers aren't, because it's teamwork. And Jamon Dumas Johnson is a leader. Again, this is a guy that's going to be with Georgia for a while. The co-defensive coordinators love him. He finished tied for the team lead in tackles this year and was a Butkus Award finalist. The fact that he can selflessly say, we don't look at stats and just play to win. This is a winner, and I think he could make a couple of potential winning plays in this game. So those are my 2 to watch for Georgia and my 2 to watch for TCU.
All right. Yeah, Andy, I kind of had the same exact thought as you did on the Georgia offensive player. Knew Tom had us covered there with Brock Bowers. For my players to watch here, my TCU offensive player to watch is Kendre Miller. For everyone who watched the semifinal, you could see that TCU offense, it stagnated a little bit for, I'd say, about 10 minutes of gameplay when he got injured and DeMarcado had to come in for him. It took some time for that TCU offense to adjust and sort of trust DeMarcado on the ground game. The running styles are a little bit different, so I think in this game it's going to be super important to get him back because DeMarcado is more of a downhill runner. From what we saw in that game, he likes to get in between the tackles and just hard nose it. I don't think that's going to happen against this Georgia defense. Yeah, the defense that they just played isn't terrible, but Georgia's got some big ass dudes on their team, some thick boys, and I don't think you're running between the tackles like you want to if you're Amari DeMarcado. So to get Miller back, who's a little more elusive, I think that would be a tremendous asset for them to have going forward in this game. It'll open everything up. Obviously his stats speak for themselves. He's had 1,400 yards on the ground and 17 touchdowns, and they don't use him through the air, so he's entirely ground focused. Is Kendre Miller. And then for the defense, like Andy for TCU, I have Hodges Tomlinson. He only has 3 interceptions on the season, but his hands are absolutely incredible in coverage. We saw that the entirety of the Michigan game. I know the Michigan offense picked up in the second half, but against Hodges Tomlinson, they still couldn't get much done. He's got 14 pass deflections on the season, which has him tied for 7th in the nation. He had 3 in the Michigan game, 2 on huge, potentially huge plays had he not gotten involved with those pass breakups. He's currently 16th rated cornerback going into the NFL draft. I think if he has even just a decent game against this Georgia receiving corps, don't be surprised to see him shoot up the order very high. And I think he's going to end up, honestly, with what we witnessed in that semifinal game. I think he's going to be a tail end of the second round going into this 2023 draft. So Georgia for offense, couldn't go Bowers, obviously, so I've gone with Mr. Reliable, Stetson Bennett here. Like I kind of said earlier, this is an odd Georgia offense in that they don't have any super standout offensive talent. Everyone is just kind of there and does their own thing and produces. Brock Bowers is obviously the closest that you would get to calling someone, like a standout star. But typically people like to think of like wide receivers and running backs that fit that bill because, they got the speed, they can make the ridiculous catches. But yeah, without the stars, I describe this Georgia offense in one word as reliable. And I think that's a great fit for someone like Stetson Bennett because that's kind of exactly what he is. He's not, certainly a star QB talent. Tom, you said we might not see him in the NFL, and I think that's, probably. I don't want to be, too harsh on the guy, but I don't think we see him at all. He might get drafted. I don't think he ever gets any playing time in the NFL. I don't think he's good enough, but he's reliable.
He's gonna be one hell of a Chevrolet dealer in Athens, Georgia.
Hey, he could be the next Brock Purdy.
True. I mean,
Mr. Irrelevant.
He could play in Shanahan's offense. I'll tell you that.
I think Purdy probably has a little bit more skill. But listen, I don't want to be too harsh on the guy. Like I said, he's reliable. He's a team player. He's a leader. So I think this Georgia offense is honestly better off, with the ability for him to spread it around with guys who aren't, fighting for this, the star power, especially in an era where NIL is taking over and, everyone wants to be the standout star and get that money early. But I think this is perfect. So, he makes good decisions on the check down, knows when to go deep and when not to, doesn't want to force anything. And when a guy isn't having a good day, which, Lad McConkey, who's one of their better wide receivers, he was held to basically nothing. I think he ended the game with negative yards in that semifinal. Yeah. So, typically Bennett loves to go to him. He couldn't, and he was able to spread the ball elsewhere. So it's going to be very important for that Georgia offense that he doesn't get impatient and doesn't try to force throws, which he hasn't throughout the season. So I think this is it's a good player to watch, despite the fact that he's not, the top player on that Georgia offense. And then for defense for me, it's got to be Jalen Carter. He's touted as one of, if not the best player available in the upcoming draft. But Ohio State kept him completely off the stat sheet almost. He ended the game with 1 tackle and 1 pass deflection. So that is not up to his standards. Ohio State's O-line did a really good job with him. But yeah, obviously, Georgia does have other stars that can make up for it when someone goes missing. Keely Ringo, Michael Williams, Javon Bullard, Malachi Starks. But you always want, your number one talent producing. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch how he adapts because there were shots of his face where he just kind of looked confused. Like, how are these guys keeping me off the board here? He's usually good for at least a sack or two and a handful of tackles, and they just did nothing. So I want to see how he responds in this game because, he almost disappeared in that last game. That will bring us to a wrap up here. We're going to do our winner and score predictions for this final. Andy, we'll start with you. Who is taking home the title, and what's your score prediction?
Unfortunately, I think Georgia is going to win. I'm going to be rooting for TCU. My score prediction is 35-21 Bulldogs.
Ooh. Tom, who's taking home the title, and what is your score prediction?
I expect a little bit closer of a game, but I also have Georgia winning. Again, the spread is 12.5 points. I think TCU defies the odds again and covers. I have a final score of 34-27, Georgia.
Okay. So far, both of you hit the under, but Andy thinks Vegas, the spread's not big enough. Yeah, I'm in this exact same boat as Andy here. 100% rooting for TCU here, but I think Georgia just is going to edge them out. That the heart attack game that they just had against Ohio State, to be able to just stay. I don't know how they stayed in that game. Honestly, like Tom, you said it earlier. C.J. Stroud had an incredible game. It was maybe one of his best games ever, and Georgia still pulls it off. So I'm gonna go Georgia wins the game, but I want some late game drama here. I'm gonna go a little bit closer even. I'm gonna say 31-28 Bulldogs in a game that's gonna cap off the season the right way. After those 2 phenomenal semifinals, we get a just as good final. But yeah, that is gonna wrap up our show. I'll wrap up our college game day shows for the season. Everyone enjoy the final. And for the final time, if you could, hit that like and subscribe button for our show down below. And down in the description for Andy and Tom's shows as well, other links down in the description. Enjoy the final, and we'll see everyone next year. Goodbye.